Many people agree that marriage is a relationship ordained by God, but it can be tricky to keep that relationship thriving. Today's guests are going to help us do that. Kelly and Joy-Lynn Stickel are a husband and wife team, and they are the lead pastors of Parallel Church right here in Lethbridge. Pastors Kelly and Joy-Lynn, welcome back to Bridge City News. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks, that was great to be here.
Excellent. Now, I'm curious, how long have you two been married now?
28 years.
Wow.
I have to double check that, yeah.
Been a
You had to
while.
look at each other. So the romance sometimes can fade in marriage, and it's entirely possible that we may not even notice the signs. Why is that?
I think it's easy to just kind of do the motions, go through life, especially when things get busy and you have kids and the kids get busy and stuff. And so it's easy to kind of lose that and not see it happen unless you're intentional. I think intentional is a big part of marriage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's easy to drift. It's easy to have just the busyness of life kind of
Mhm.
occupy or preoccupy what the focus is. So like Joy-Lynn said, is you have to be intentional in making effort to make sure that the marriage is priority over all of the distractions that
Yeah.
can potentially come.
Yeah.
And once you notice the romance thermometer is dropping down, what steps should be taken to get the temperature back up again?
I think a big part of that again is the intentionality of making sure daily you're having connected time with one another, that whether that's a deep conversation or whatever, just to make sure that a priority daily. Weekly, it's great to go on dates and set aside an evening or time with each other.
Yeah.
We like to quarterly get away for a night or two, yearly go on a holiday that just the two of us away from the kids and distractions of life, and kind of rekindle relationship there that way. But again, it's intentionally saying, okay, we're going to put that in our calendar, we're going to make it a priority, make our marriage a priority, and focus on doing just that, and putting in the calendar, not just saying we want to,
Yeah.
but actually put it in the calendar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the Bible says where your treasure is, your heart is there also. And so I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical treasure, but if you figure out what your spouse's love language is and how they feel loved and connected, then intentionally putting that treasure into your marriage, your heart will follow if it's kind of lagging behind. But yeah, I think it's easy, like we had said, it's easy to kind of get overwhelmed and just go through the motions. So just being intentional, putting it in your calendar is a big part of it.
Now let's talk about married couples for a bit here, because long ago I was married and didn't last very long, but I want to talk about like the honeymoon phase, because that can wear off sometimes. And I noticed that very early on into my marriage, I started noticing things like, oh, like she's snoring louder than she normally does, or like has her morning breath always been that pungent? So what are some steps to stay in that honeymoon phase or keep it going longer?
I think the honeymoon stage is often what we classify as the feelings of love, that feeling part of love, which is there, and it's a real thing. But love is much deeper than just the emotions that we
Yeah.
feel at on a time. And so when we get familiar with someone and we get to know them, we get to see the real them. Sometimes the feelings aren't there, but what Paul describes love in First Corinthians 13 is like, love is patient. Well, I don't remember the last time I had the feeling of being patient. It's not a feeling driven thing at all. And love is kind. Love is doesn't envy. Love is keeps no record of wrongs. None of what he lists in First Corinthians 13 is based on feelings. So there are decisions that we have to make on a daily basis, and push beyond the feelings, the emotions, the triggers, all those things, and just say no, despite the nuances of being imperfect people with one another, that we're going to push beyond that and choose to love, choose to be kind, choose to be patient, choose
Yeah.
to be keep no records of wrong, and make those choices every day.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize that, especially however long we've been married, you're always growing as a person, or you should be always growing as a person, and your spouse is always growing as a person. So if you are stuck in who they were when you were dating, and not allowing them the chance to grow and the growing pains that go with that, then you're taking away a lot of what real life is. And the beauty of being in a partnership like a marriage is that you get to grow each other, and you get to sharpen iron sharpens each other, right?
Right.
Yes.
And it's a cool thing to just give them the space and give yourself the space to become who you're becoming. And that is hard sometimes, right?
Yes.
Now, obviously, it's important for couples to communicate in some fashion that you love and appreciate one another. I mean, I've heard some guys say, like, well, I told you when I met you I love you, and if anything changes, I'll let you know.
Horrible.
Obviously, that's not healthy. So any suggestions on how we can do this and how often we need to show our love and appreciation?
Love languages.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you should be the biggest cheerleader for your spouse, and you should be the biggest student of your spouse. And so figuring out who they are and how they feel love, and um yeah, and show them that way, because it's they're going to feel it better that way. So with the love languages, like mine are words of affirmation. Mine are most of them, but he says I'm either easy to love or hard to love, because I'll take it all. But I'm easy to love, right?
Yes. Very much.
So words of affirmation, if he doesn't as much get that, or feel loved by that. He feels loved more by the acts of service and stuff. So if I'm constantly just gushing on him with words but don't do anything for him, he's not going to feel that as much. And so again, being intentional, being the student of your spouse, and making it your priority to study who they are and how they feel loved is a big part of it.
And if couples haven't read that book, The Five Love Languages,
Mhm.
it's a must for every marriage. And the natural tendency for all of us, is like Joy-Lynn said, is to give what we receive naturally ourselves, is
Yeah.
to give that back. But that's not necessarily the language that our spouse uh, receives. And so we need to be able to speak their language
Yeah.
over our own preferences, and give preference to what they need most,
Yeah.
and do that on a daily basis. Like that's not something that you let slide for a while and say at the altar and never say again. like it's a daily practice of making sure that they feel loved and cherished, and our priorities over anyone and everyone else.
Yeah.
I agree what you said about the five love languages, because it's amazing that that book has really gained popularity even in non-faith relationships. In fact, being on dating apps, I've noticed a lot of people are even asking what their love languages, asking each other what their love languages are, or saying these are my love languages, or they're sharing their Myers-Briggs. But what really fascinated me was they are talking about love languages. So I think that's really fascinating, that something that came from a Christian author is really so popular amongst all kinds of relationships here. Now, I've also noticed that marriage experts encourage couples to find things that they both enjoy and to do those things together. But that can be tough to find time with kids and work, etc. So how do you find time?
I don't think you ever find time. I think you have to make time.
You
Um,
claim time.
You claim time.
Yeah.
And I think you have to make it a priority, and saying, okay, well, if we just wait to find time,
Mhm.
life's going to eat that up really quick. I think you have to be intentional and make the time, and pay attention rather than just get distracted or what grabs your attention. Pay attention, make the effort to pay attention to your spouse, make the time to be together and to
Yeah.
do things that you enjoy together. Um, yeah.
And I think it's super healthy for kids to see a strong relationship between parents and to not be the center of attention. So they're going to go into stronger relationships when they're older if they've seen it demonstrated throughout their life, and they've seen dad prioritize mom over them sometimes too, right? And vice versa. And so you're helping your children by showing them how a good relationship works and that mom and dad are prioritized, and that gives them security as well, to know that
Absolutely.
that they're secure in the family.
Now, today's couples typically watch a lot of TV programs together, and there's a lot of binge-worthy content out there. But they can also get influenced by social media, and this can portray a somewhat unrealistic view of what a husband or wife should look like and how they should behave. Do we need to adjust our marriage expectations?
Absolutely. I think social media has probably done a greater disservice, I think, than even television lately.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times what we do, walk right into the comparison trap where we begin to compare our behind the scenes to somebody's highlight reels. And we have to recognize that what is portrayed on social media is somebody's highlight reels. You're not seeing behind the scenes. You're not seeing all the messes and the messiness of life that is real.
Yep.
And so it's dangerous to watch somebody on social media or watch a marriage on social media and going, oh, I wish my husband was like, or I wish my wife was more like, or I wish our marriage was like that. A very dangerous thing to do, to walk into that comparison trap, and it puts undue expectations on yourself, but undue expectations on your spouse. And recognize, hey, our marriage is different than anybody else's, but this is our marriage. We don't, this is our relationship. This is our personalities coming together to becoming one, and it's not going to look like everybody else's.
And over time, we can start to get critical of one another, especially like if we're seeing the same person every single day, day in, day out, every day, every weekend. How can couples break that cycle of negative communication?
In the art of communication, like, psychologists will talk about changing the story in your head. And oftentimes, like, we go in with a preconceived, especially to those that we're closest with, we go into a preconceived idea of, oh, they did that on purpose, or they're trying to, and we ended up getting critical because they forgot this again, or it's just like them, this. And psychologists say, change the story in your head. And like Joy-Lynn said, hey, when we were in love, when we got married, why would somebody who loves me so much promise, their lives with mine? Why would they intentionally try to hurt me? If I can change the story, they're not intentionally trying to hurt me. And just simply changing the story in my own head is going to allow me to enter into the communication with not defensiveness, not angst. It's going to allow me to enter the conversation with, hey, being open and saying, hey, this hurt me. I felt this, and I know you didn't mean it, but I felt this, and it becomes a lot easier to have a conversation than going in accusatory.
Yeah.
And as unique and wonderful as we all are, that means we are all wired slightly differently, which can lead to some conflict. So once an argument starts, what advice do you have on how to fight fair?
Well, some of the advice that I use, and we use, and that we counsel other couples in, is to avoid starting an argument with an accusation. So avoid starting an argument with, you always, we typically say things like, you're always late, or you never do this for me, or whatever. And we encourage people to not use the words always and never, because they're never true, and to not start a discussion with an accusation with you. Instead, begin the discussion with, or turn the discussion with, hey, I feel when this happened, when you didn't show up on time, when I expected, I felt disappointed, or I felt this. And it's very difficult. People do it, but it's very difficult to argue with someone's feelings. And it's more like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, I'm sorry. We end up typically going into a more of a having a conversation about the real issues, rather than arguing over, well, I was on time. You're always late. No, I was on time 3 weeks ago. We start nitpicking over the little details, and the argument goes way off the rails, and becomes accusatory. So our natural response when somebody accuses us is to get defensive, and then we fight back. But if somebody begins the conversation with "I feel," it's I'm not feeling like I need to get defensive, and I'm not feeling like I need to go on an attack mode. I want to have now the conversation and get to the real heart of the issue.
Yeah. And you need to make space for grace in your marriage, in yourself, and in others, right? And it's just the grace that we get from God. We need to be thankful for that and extend it to others.
I love that. Make space for grace. And how important is it to sincerely apologize for the wrongs and to forgive one another and leave the past in the past?
Very important, I think, just with anybody, right? Like you hear it said that unforgiveness hurts you more than anyone else. But when you're in a tight marriage and a partnership, it's going to hurt anybody around you. And the shrapnel from that is going to just continue to hurt people. And so it's important for your own health. It's important for your marriage and your family and any dynamic around you to forgive and just to move on and work through things. Definitely, if there's things that need to be worked through, and let go of things that just need to be forgiven and moved past.
And what about making time for date nights? Is that still something that should happen regularly, even if you have a tight budget? I know a lot of people are cutting back on things, and I think their recreation and their pleasure time is really taking a hit these days.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's ways. A lot of the excuses or a lot of the reasons are children, and I think there's ways to like babysit, share. I guess having friends that have little kids and say, okay, this week you have all the kids, and this week I'll have all the kids, and figure out ways to take care of your kids and figure out ways it doesn't have to cost. We have lots of date nights at home, and we enjoy those, and it costs a lot less. And yeah.
And I think if you take money out of the equation, it allows you to become a lot more creative, which becomes a lot more fun as to what you're going to be able to do, and saying, well, hey, let's what can we do without spending money, or even what we like to do is put into budget date nights and saying it's going to be a regular part of our finances in putting into our budget, so that we're not bracing and going, well, we can't afford to, we can't do that. Then it's not as fun. Then you're feeling the pressure of the finances as well, which takes away from the whole purpose of the night anyway. So
well, and then you're prioritizing again. In your budget, you might need to cut back on different things, but you're like, that's important because I get my date night with my husband, and that's going to be long-term importance.
Yeah.
Kelly and Joy-Lynn Stickel are the lead pastors of Parallel Church in Lethbridge. Kelly and Joy-Lynn, thanks so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.